Thank you all for joining us here online. Probably some more people will drop in. So this summer we saw this sudden arrival and popularity of Pokémon Go, and mainly among the youth, but also among other older people. And the game was released on 6th July, and within weeks it was dominating the streets of many cities. And within less than 3 weeks, it had already 20 million daily active users in the United States alone. And recent figures suggest that the game has already brought in more than $500 million, which is incomparable to any other mobile game. No other game has ever reached such a revenue within such a short amount of time. It is still a question whether the game was just a summer hype or is here to stay. It is reportedly steadily losing daily active users, and its growth might be plateauing. Yet the game has brought something very important into focus, and that is the power of augmented reality and the enormous potential it may have, not only in the gaming sector but also in health or education. And today we will discuss these policy aspects of augmented reality, focusing on what we have witnessed in different policy areas during the Pokemon Go phenomenon. But first, we'd like to introduce the phenomenon of augmented reality itself. We have with us today Daniel Rosen-Jacobson, who is Industry Manager of Apps and Gaming Partnerships at Google. And he will talk about augmented reality, about its background and future applications from a Google point of view. And next, Dr. Jovan Kobalia will look at augmented reality from more maybe a perspective of international law, or maybe even philosophy, as it may blur the distinction between cyberspace and physical space. Can we still actually talk about a separate, distinctive cyberspace, and what are the legal or political consequences of that? If you have any questions or remarks, feel free to write them in the text box below. And I will forward them to the speakers after their presentation. I will also myself discuss or briefly present a study that the GIP Digital Watch Observatory made about the effects of Pokemon Go on different policy domains. So without further ado, Daniel, go ahead.
Yes, okay, I'm just gonna share my screen for a second. Okay. Can everybody hear me and see my presentation? Just double check. Yes, please go ahead. Okay, perfect. So, as Barbara said, my name is Daniel. I work as an industry manager in strategic apps and gaming partnerships at Google, which means that I work with many of the big gaming companies in mostly in Europe, but also in the rest of the world. And I am sort of the link between those companies and Google. So I'm very much involved with our product development in the gaming space, and also work with them on many aspects of their business, such as, for example, monetization. Today I want to talk to you about a little bit about Pokemon Go. So I'll take like a very basic approach in just reminding how the phenomenon came about and explaining a little bit how the technology works. And then I'll talk a little bit about smartphone VR and AR, so virtual reality and augmented reality at Google. The reason I also included virtual reality is because I think these two concepts are very much linked, and the borders between the two are blurring and are going to blur even further. The reason being that, for example, VR cameras are increasingly popular. Also, VR live streaming is increasingly popular, and so this creates a situation where you can create your own VR content and then use augmented reality to superimpose things on that. So I'll give a little bit of a future view of what we're working at Google in this space. I'm not really going to talk about anything policy or politics related. I'll leave that to the experts. So just to start off with kind of a couple of interesting headlines. I'm sure we've all seen headlines like this. They were all over the news. Mind you, this is not like obviously taken from a traditional news website, and one could argue a slightly questionable source. But I thought it made the point of saying that really Pokemon has impacted daily life in a major way, and it has interacted with many different aspects of our life, and therefore been extremely news worthy, I suppose. So I'm not saying, I don't think ISIS took responsibility for Pokemon Go's login problems, but I do think it impacted our real world very heavily. So just to look at what exactly happened and how it was launched. So it seems a little bit like it came out of nowhere. The app was initially released in 3 markets in the beginning of July, in US, Australia, New Zealand. So this is really common practice for the release of games to first release in a few markets. Like Australia and New Zealand are typically test markets because they're fairly small and users are of relatively high quality. And then the US, of course, is the largest gaming market in the world. And very, very quickly, in less than a week, it was still in 3 markets, but managed to break many records. And in the US, it already had over 21 million daily active users, which is one of the main metrics we use to evaluate the success of apps, passing Candy Crush Saga and also Draw Something and these kind of record-holding apps. What's interesting to mention as well is that even though it was only released in 3 markets, it was downloaded almost instantly all across the world. So there were many hacks available in the simple sense that you could just go online, find the APK, so find the apps package and download it to your phone, and it would work wherever you were. So I know that like in that week that it was released, a lot of people here were already using it and it worked fine. So I think it was sort of instantly used globally, but only released in 3 markets officially in the stores, which also maybe added a little bit to the exclusivity of it and the initial boom that people felt kind of that they were doing something that it wasn't necessarily launched, but they already had it and they felt sort of ahead of the curve there. So then it very quickly became one of the most successful mobile games ever in the US, based on daily active users. And only 3 weeks after the launch, it had been downloaded more than 70 million times and earned over 35 million in revenue by one estimate. So it was a huge success very quickly, but it wasn't really an overnight success. So if you take a little look at Pokémon Go, it was built by a company called Niantic. So Niantic was actually a Google company initially, an internal company, which spun off with the creation of Alphabet last year. The CEO of Niantic actually founded a company in the early 2000s called Keyhole, which already used maps technology to build many different applications, but also games. And in a way, he had an early vision of a Pokemon Go style game already as early as more than 10 years ago. Niantic released a game, an augmented reality game called Ingress in 2012, which was a location-based multiplayer game. It was actually very popular here internally in Google, and then it was also publicly released, where players could compete for the control of points of interest, like landmarks in their neighborhood, and then sort of building a territory with their team and competing with other teams. So it sounds like really familiar to, if you compare it to Pokemon. Very similar technology. In 2014, Google Maps actually launched an Easter egg publicly, of which I just want to show a little video called the Pokemon Challenge.
At Google, we seek to hire the most exceptional people. Today, we're announcing a new job role and challenge.
So just for the interest of time, I'll stop it there, but you can take a look at it later. It's quite funny. So it was just as a little joke, as a little Easter egg, publicly released, but that was more than 2 years before Pokemon Go, and really explains. I mean, you know, there are Pokemons on the map, and the idea is that you can catch them. So it sort of predicted Pokemon Go 2 years ago. Then if you look at Pokemon Go, as I said, it's a lot of it is based on Ingress. And I think that what Niantic really wanted to do is release a game like Ingress with a commercial partner, and with a brand. And I think Pokemon was a very good fit for that. So they really wanted something that was familiar. And John Hanke said in an interview that he doesn't think if they had made up characters and created a completely new game, it obviously wouldn't have been as successful. So why is Pokemon Go so successful? I think there are many different factors, but I'm going to highlight three real quick. The first one is that is a very obvious one. Like Pokemon is a huge brand. It has a very strong and very devoted fan base, that really created a situation where people were like almost dying of anticipation, completely excited for the launch of this game. And as soon as it was released, many people downloaded it straight away and were completely devoted and some might say obsessed with it. So I think that had a very strong element. And Pokemon hadn't really released any successful games for a very long time, since sort of the Nintendo DS era, that was as successful as those games. Then second, and I think one of the most important ones, is that it uses community as a feature. So I think this point was raised just at the start, before we started, that you see people use their phones, you recognize them. If you've played the game and you see people, for example, around you playing the game, you see them winning over a gym, for example, you actually recognize them as other Pokemon players, and that's how the game is designed. Also, there are many features in the game that allow you, for example, to take pictures of Pokemon and send them to friends and share them on social media very quickly with just a click of one finger, which make it very community-based, which is very clever, of course, for it to go viral. Then this picture in the slide is actually taken, it's actually a screenshot of a video, but it was taken in Central Park. And I'm sure some of you might have seen this. This was all across the news, because it's actually New York in Central Park, and a very rare Pokemon was spotted, I think about a week after Pokemon Go was released, Vaporeon, and basically all these massive crowds were drawn to Central Park to catch this Pokemon, which just was insane and ridiculous if you think about it. Then finally, augmented reality just really is the killer feature here. It brings the world of Pokemon, connects it to real life, and allows you to see the world around you and have this kind of fictional world of Pokemon superimposed on it. So then if we look at the really basic concept of augmented reality, it's that, right? It's the fact that you use the real world through video or through live stream or through photos and superimpose fictional images onto that world, providing sort of a new world, a new reality, which is the augmented reality. And the reason why that's possible and so easy or relatively cool is that the phone has a couple of elements that allows for this to be done. Location, of course, like the fact that they can use maps technology in order to know where you are and in order to navigate through the world. Compass, touch, display, all very obvious. And then inertia, I think, is a very important point, which basically means that the phone is a static element. It's a constant factor that can be controlled by developers, where it's not like nature, which is very hard to control. So you basically have this whole world that is completely random and controlled by nature, and then this element that can be controlled within your phone, where you can actually control the environment and control whatever is superimposed. So that causes for quite interesting dynamics in augmented reality. So then I want to go a little bit into what we're doing at Google in smartphone, VR, and AR, and how this sort of relates to each other. So first of all, the mission of Google has always been, actually, since the beginning, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So the reason why I highlighted universally accessible here is because I think it's very relevant. I think a lot of the concepts, such as virtual reality and augmented reality, have been around for many, many years. Augmented reality has been around for at least, let's say, 8, 9 years, maybe longer in its form. And virtual reality, I mean, there were already in the 80s, there were already forms of virtual reality, but it just never really took off the way it took off now. And even now there is virtual reality, but not a lot of it is for the masses. And I think what Google tried to do is start initiatives that bring this more to the regular consumer. So, for example, Google Cardboard, which some of you might know about, is really a very simple, bite-sized virtual reality viewer that you can use with your mobile phone. It costs about $5 and really brings this world that was initially only affordable and interesting for people who are, hardcore gamers, or who are, have a couple of €100 spare for example, an Oculus Rift. This really brought it to the masses. Then another piece of the puzzle there is Daydream, which is a platform, really a VR platform for developers to develop VR content and distribute it to consumers through mobile phones. So basically, you can see it as a sort of add-on to Android, to the operating system, where you can basically start using virtual reality style worlds on your mobile phone. And these are like these fully immersive worlds where you can look around and you can really feel like you're there. And also the devices will change, right? So smartphones will become VR ready, so to speak. And these are, I think the first of those should be coming very soon, maybe even like this fall. Another element is the cameras, the actual recording. So it will become increasingly easier for people to record VR content through, for example, an app or through a small add-on camera on your phone, where you could create your own VR pictures or your own VR video with 3D and sound, making it very easy to actually map the world around you, and then potentially leading the way for augmenting it as well. So this is just an example of that in Peru, Machu Picchu, where this has been taken with a simple VR camera. So then the AR piece, the augmented reality piece. I think the main thing that I wanted to highlight here is that if you look at Pokémon Go, it's really a very basic form of augmented reality, in the sense that you can see the world around you and it uses your camera to show you the world around you. And then it basically shows you a Pokemon floating in the middle of your screen, which in essence is quite simplified if you think about the fact that it doesn't really know anything about your environment. It doesn't know that there's a table here, or that there's a chair there, or that that your friend is there, and it can't really put the Pokemon on your friend's head, for example, which is kind of what Project Tango is about, which is a project from Google to create devices that have many different motion sensors in order to understand better the world around you, and then use that to augment the reality in a much more sophisticated way, which is sort of the future of augmented reality. So I have another short video just to quickly show what I mean there.
The first experience is an out-of-the-box app to help introduce people to the new functionality of their new phone. And so as you can see here, what it's doing is that it's building a point cloud of the stage in front of us. And as I walk around, you can see it recognizes the 3D shapes around it. It's mostly a flat stage, so there's a flat floor here. And we're visited by some friends. It transforms the world into a fully virtual space and begins to grow the life around it. And if I want to, I can get up and close, look at all the detail of the flowers and rocks. So what we have here is a a collection of dinosaurs that we can visualize. And the fun thing is that we can actually place them here on the stage. We have a velociraptor there. If I want to see compared to one of the other dinosaurs, I place him there. And we can see the different animals there on stage with us, and you can see the different sizes and learn a little bit about each one. So that's a
Okay, I'll stop it there again for the interest of time, but these videos will be available to watch later on. So just to take that back to what we were talking about earlier, your phone is basically quite limited to its own screen. So it really doesn't know that much about the environment around you. And so if you think about the use cases where your phone or where technology is useful, for example, like figuring out what appliances or decorations to buy for your kitchen, or at work when you're working on a project, or when you're out to dinner and you're in kind of a social environment and you're figuring out what kind of you want to do next with your friends. Really, you're quite tied to your screen, and it's quite limited in what you can do and what it knows about what's going on in your environment, basically. So really, what we want to do is to try and teach phones more about what's going on, what you want to do, and the environment around you, in order to be more useful, basically, to you. For example, measuring space. So basically augmenting, using your phone to augment your room to measure space, or to see, for example, what kind of furniture would fit in your living room. So I know that IKEA, for example, there's a video there which I won't show now, but IKEA has a really cool initiative where you can use augmented reality to look to see what kind of their furniture looks like in your house, in your interior, and whether you like it, whether it fits, and whether you want to buy it or not. And this is another example, for example, trying to find something in the supermarket. So using sort of maps and navigation technology to find a specific item in the supermarket. So I'll leave it at that. I hope I gave a little bit of an overview of what augmented reality is and where it's going. I think this statement sort of sums it up. So just help understand where things are and what you can see, and how technology can assist with whatever you're doing in that environment. So with that, thanks very much, and I'll exit the full screen.
Thank you, Daniel. It was very interesting and very good to hear, before we turn to philosophy and policy discussions, to actually understand what augmented reality is, where it came from, and where it is going. We have a couple of questions from the participants. Well, the first question that was repeated a couple of times is whether you would like to share your slides, because people find this very interesting.
Yeah, so I might need to take a couple of things out, but I'll be able to share most of it.
And then there was a question regarding personal data, because augmented reality collects a lot of personal data, I can imagine. Has there been a lot of consideration for privacy concerns from Google? And then the other question is whether Google is working on applications of augmented reality in education.
Cool. So for the security and privacy element, I think this is a very logical concern. I think in general, when you're dealing with mobile phones, privacy and protection of data is in general a very important topic. I don't think it's very different in augmented reality. I think that it's just another form of collecting data through maps. And so, if you're already sharing your technology, your location, if you're already sharing your location, then this is no real different. I don't think augmented reality necessarily adds another element to that's already there, which is the protection of data of your kind of footprint online. So it's not even necessarily limited to mobile, in my opinion. So to answer the question, I think that if you're a tech company like Google or Facebook or some of the others, I think that the key value differentiator and the key to survival really is the protection of that data and the trust people have in you being able to protect that data. And I think it will, with things like augmented reality and with maps, these kind of maps-related location-based technologies, will become increasingly relevant and important. And people will, I think people have only just started realizing what it actually means and what sharing, all the things that they're sharing means in terms of security. So I know that in Google, it's one of the top, maybe even the top priority is to nail this. So to really make sure that data is protected and nobody can touch it and everything is encrypted. And so I think it's a very good question, and I think it's very much top of mind for everyone. And I also think that if you look at cybersecurity as an industry, it's exploding. So I think there are a lot of new technologies coming up and a lot of new startups that are also trying to figure this out and solve this issue. And I think it's key to the success of the industry. So I forgot the second question.
It was about applications in education.
So yes, if you look, I'm not too sure about augmented reality. So the project I showed, Project Tango, is open to about 200,000 developers now that are developing for Tango, for the device. I would be surprised if there wasn't anything educational related, so I can definitely have a look at that and follow up on that. I know that for virtual reality, there are already tons of apps that you can use with cardboard. For example, I know like the New York Times and the Natural History Museum and all those kind of institutions have already released some VR apps that you can use with cardboard, where you can look around basically the museums and many other different initiatives. So you can go and check out some natural sites and things like that and learn about it. And there are also many other apps, educational apps. So basically, what you need to realize is that if you're a developer and you make apps already, actually making a virtual reality app is not very difficult. So of course it's not easy, but once all the technology is there, it's just a matter of being able to, instead of showing it in the static screen, showing it in a 360 view, so people can look around. But there are many examples already. So Google itself, I'm not sure if we are making like real educational apps at the moment, but yeah, I can double check that as well.
Thanks. We have quite some questions incoming now. I think we should turn to Jovan and we can
continue with the questions. I think they're really interesting. Yeah, please.
Okay, great. Well, Jovan, actually, you had a question as well, right, regarding Second Life?
This is why I'm pushing you.
Jovan asked in the chat, let me see.
Well, the question
whether you expect a revival of a platform like Second Life with in new technologies.
So I'm always a bit cautious to try to predict the future because I'm not very good at it, and especially in something like technology where things change so fast. So I think definitely, if you think about, there's definitely a possibility for this to become popular. If you think about the fact that life is becoming increasingly confronted with technology. It also creates a lot of social problems, like people could feel more lonely and there's less maybe physical social interaction in the world. And I think that Second Life was a very early sort of conceptualized version of that idea, and I think there's definitely space for sort of social immersive worlds like that. And I think like virtual reality is a very good tool to do something like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense that would happen. I think what's really interesting with augmented reality is that you can do very cool things like if you're with a group of friends, you could potentially, I mean, the technology could allow you to, for example, superimpose fictional characters onto your friends. So playing a board game around a table or like a story style game could become very exciting because, like Jovan could become like a wizard, and Barbara could become a fairy, and I could become a troll or something like that, and then we could all, and that could really make it very real because we would still be the same person, just with a different face.
Thanks for that, and good that I can be the fairy, not the troll. We have a couple of other questions. One is, I think Marilia asked it, what is being done with the images captured while playing augmented reality? Is there, are there privacy, what are the privacy or maybe even copyright dimensions of that?
Yeah.
Also, why is, are these augmented reality applications mainly available on phones and not on tablets? Are they available on tablets? And if not, why wouldn't they be?
They're definitely available on tablets, so that's an easy answer. For the question of data again, I think that when you look at the type of data that's now being shared, right? So if you look at your phone, whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone, basically there are a lot of rules already about what data is available. So I'm not talking about criminal activity, like anything can be hacked, or I'm talking about like what's legally allowed. So it's definitely not allowed currently to use specific personal data of somebody, of what they're doing with their phone, right? So whether it being images or whether it being location or whether it being anything that they do. So the only thing that is allowed, with the user consent, which is usually like an opt-in, opt-out feature, is aggregating that data. So basically making a pile of data that then companies can use to do various things. For example, target certain type of apps or advertising or whatever. This is called like an advertiser ID, for example. So I think if you look at it's definitely not the case that somebody can go and check out what one of us has been doing on their phone. What is allowed or what is possible is that you can see that a demographic group has been doing something, or there's some sort of trend, and that is very different in my opinion, and actually can be very useful in kind of the progress of many different things, technology and social aspects.
So using aggregated big data to analyze trends and we have another question regarding private spaces. For example, when a Pokémon is in a home, what is the interplay between augmented reality and private property? And I think what is also interesting about this, what I've heard is in the media, for example, that when Pokémon Go was released, there was at some point a Pikachu in a hospital in Amsterdam, and they wanted to get rid of it because then everyone went into the hospital and disturbed patients.
Yeah.
How do you prevent such cases, or can you even prevent such cases?
It's interesting. This is a super interesting question. So, and I'm not sure how to directly answer it, because I think there are many examples of this where people have trespassed on private property. People have gathered in certain places where they shouldn't have, like you said. I think from the game perspective, it's very hard to control, because I think that how Pokemon Go works is that it's very random. It's very random. So they just have they just scale out all these Pokemons across the world and don't really think about where they actually end up. I think that it's sort of up to societies then to control this. So as you said, the hospital can act on that and request for example, no Pokemons to be allowed like reactively in that location. And I think there are also many companies, for example, that have kind of implemented policies to stop people from playing Pokemon Go while at work, for example, because many people were just spending their working hours walking around their offices trying to catch Pokemon. And I've seen many cases where people have said, okay, you can't do this. If we catch people playing Pokemon, then you don't work here anymore, which I think is quite rigorous. But there are many like examples of that. So I don't think I think it's very difficult to control something like that at the source, although maybe in the future that will happen. And I think it's more now a matter of society to and policy and politics to actually decide where this fits in and how it should be controlled.
Related to this question, we have a question from Richard Jonathan who asks, to what extent would augmented reality developers such as Niantic make themselves subject to lawsuits for people lured into dangerous or no-go areas? Yeah. I don't know to what extent you can answer this. But.
I mean, what I can say, for example, is that it clearly is a concern for Niantic, because if you start Pokemon, you get a couple of notifications saying, be careful, don't go into dangerous areas. If you're, for example, in a car or in a bus and you're playing Pokemon, it will pop up and say, you're going too fast, don't play Pokemon while driving. And so it clearly is something that they realize is a problem, and also is something that they try to do something about. So I think it's a very legitimate question. And again, like especially in the US, lawsuits like this happen all the time. And it will be unprecedented, right? So there's never been, I think, cases like this before where it's been at this scale, where it's happened at this scale. So it'll be very interesting if that even happens. What then will be decided by a court.
And Kriti, he or she, says, is it possible to proactively filter on sensitive locations or preferred locations?
That's a very good question.
Or is it all randomized?
That's a very good question. I don't actually think so, but that would be a very good solution, I guess. But I guess you can report things in the app, which means that you could potentially report sensitive locations, which they will then probably evaluate and look at. But it makes a lot of sense to crowdsource this kind of data.
Okay, I think we have caught up with the Q&A. Jovan, would you like to share your thoughts on the dimensions of cyberspace and virtual reality?
Great. It was so interesting that I don't feel comfortable speaking about after Daniel with such great authority, and I can reveal the secret. I'm among no voters, although Barbara showed me how to play recently. Now, the story about my encounter with Pokemon goes to Cambodia in July this year. I was in Angkor Wat, Siem Reap, starting my search for number 0. Basically, as you know, the 0 came to Europe via Arabs and India from Cambodia. The earliest sort of spot where 0 was found was found close to Angkor Wat in 605. That was in one old sort of Angkor or ancient space. Now, I wrote in my Facebook post that in the search for 0, and a friend of mine from Croatia answered, you shouldn't waste your time with the 0, you should search for Pokemon. And it was, now I see it more or less was when the Pokemon was released. And at that point, I also, now I'm trying to connect the dots. I started being alert, reading all news like all of you on what's Pokemon, what's going on. And I also got the news from the Warsaw NATO summit that NATO declared cyberspace as a fourth military operational domain, in addition to land, water, and air. There was something which was discussed previously as generic concept of cyberspace, which people have difficulties to define, suddenly became a really operational concept where people will have to build armies, prepare for the war, and governments have to invest to include it in the budget. But I was puzzled since till today, I think we cannot clearly define the cyberspace. What is it? Is my computer from which I'm connecting the cyberspace? No, it's physical space. It's in my office. But there is something different. We cannot ignore a cyberspace. We interact. There is a life in cyberspace. So this is a big issue, which is going to be discussed by academics, policymakers, and diplomats with very practical and concrete references. Then when I returned to Geneva, I was fortunate to have one of those chats in the office with Barbara, and Barbara told me, well, I am Pokemon generation. And then I started discovering Pokemon. And what was for me the most fascinating was that interplay between physical and virtual. In the past, the discussion was more or less clearly separated. We have a virtual space and we have physical space. Now you have a tool which blends two spaces. As Daniel shown, we are basically browsing, you are using our mobile tablets, but we are also in our physical surrounding. And this is how our discussion on the policy aspects of the Pokemon started. Barbara will share later on the survey which was done by our team. Many of our colleagues from the team are here at the webinar. But what fascinated me, and it still is one of my priorities in my research, is we can call it philosophical legal concept of space. What is this new space, cyberspace, or space which is created by Pokemon? Now, this abstract or philosophical concept became quite concrete when, for example, Volkswagen or Boeing, two companies that banned use of the Pokemon on their premises because of the risk of the industrial espionage. Or you have also banned in the few Muslim countries by religious leaders in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, I think Malaysia. And there are also bans for the security reasons. Therefore, suddenly this interplay between virtual and territorial has become so direct and so impactful on our reality. That informed our discussion, and what we are currently doing, we are doing some sort of background philosophical research on the perception of the virtual and the real in the writings of the philosophers, and also augmenting it in a way to our discussion on the cyberspace and what we can learn from the old theories. In this process, and after discussion with Barbara, we also came to an interesting idea, and I will reveal it, and if you can join us, that would be great. We're trying to create augmented reality tool where you will be able to see in Geneva by walking through the park and meet, for example, Voltaire or Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Borges or other great people that lived in this city. And hopefully, if you have artificial intelligence tool, have a chat with them. And that's another interesting idea of blending augmented reality and artificial intelligence, that you can sit on this Jardin Botanique, botanic garden just opposite my office, and have a chat with Voltaire about the current problems, purpose of life, happiness, and whatever comes to your mind. Therefore, possibilities are enormous, risks are there. We as a society have to answer some questions in order to make sure that this great tool, which Daniel explained, is used to advancement of the well-being of society and helping us. For example, I would have loved to have this tool a few days ago when I lost my car in the big parking in Geneva. Whatever augmented reality or virtual reality tool would have helped save me at least 1 hour trying to find my car on the 5 layers of the big parking space, big garage here in Geneva. Therefore, this is the main sort of context and purpose, how we can make sure philosophically, legally, policy to open the space for this really great and enabling development which new technology is offering us. Barbara, over to you.
Thanks, Johan, for a quick summary of these insights that we have been developing over the last 2 months, I think. I would like now to share with you very quickly a study that we did with the GIP Digital Watch Observatory. We have a team of curators, kind of experts on different topics related to internet governance and digital policy. And these experts have outlined how augmented reality, and in particular Pokémon Go, affects their respective fields of expertise. So if we, for example, have a look at the infrastructure basket, infrastructure and standardization, augmented reality may help boost 5G networks, and it could affect industry convergence. If you scroll down, it could have if it would interact with the Internet of Things, it might result in very interesting applications. Furthermore, if you scroll even further down, you see the security basket. We have already touched upon a lot of security issues, and they were really at the forefront of the debate surrounding Pokémon Go this summer. And not only focused on cybersecurity, but also focused on physical security, mainly due to the distraction while playing the game by individual users. And closely related to this issue, if you scroll down, we arrive at the human rights basket and privacy rights of users of the game, which were also highlighted during the debates this summer. And especially because of this geolocation, because the game is really anchored in geolocation, and there is a fear that the whereabouts of the users or the players of the game is being recorded. And among other things, these concerns have led to suspicions in quite some countries, including Russia, Indonesia, Israel, about the ability of external actors to monitor their citizens' whereabouts. Then if you scroll down even more, we have the legal basket and the economic basket. In the economic realm, we can clearly see that Pokémon Go has an enormous revenue potential, and this revenue potential of new internet business models is very important, especially if you think about taxation or consumer protection issues. And then we have the development basket as well. we have a lot of information. Development basket. We have also looked at applications. How can Pokémon Go or augmented reality in general be beneficial for sustainable development, for example, in the areas of education, which we already talked about, and I saw some very interesting proposals in the chat of all these ways in which augmented reality could be used in education, but also in, for example, public health and awareness raising. I've heard of a UN initiative that used, I think it was virtual reality, to raise awareness about certain issues, especially related to human rights and conflict. Finally, the game has raised some socio-cultural concerns, and Jovan has already talked about this a little bit, especially in Islamic countries, because the game has been considered as un-Islamic by certain religious authorities in Egypt and Malaysia, and in Saudi Arabia this led to a ban on the game. So this is just a really quick summary of all these issues, and there are many, many more, and their interaction with augmented reality. And to have a full overview of the research that we did, you should go to digitalwatch.gipplatform.org/trends/Pokemon. It's on the bottom of the document, if you can scroll down to that, or maybe I can do that. I will also write it in the chat. Here you go. And in the meantime, let's see if we have any more incoming questions.
If I can just add one thing, I think a very interesting element as well that you need to realize about Pokemon Go is that the popularity of these kind of apps is usually very short. So if you look at Pokemon Go now, the user base went up very, very fast, but now it has a huge dip, and it started plateauing maybe a month after it was released, and now it's decreased immensely, right? So these games are not going to be around, like Pokemon Go in this form is not going to be around for years. There's going to be like a new game doing something new in a similar way that may or may not be successful. And so it's quite exciting to see what's going to happen next. And I think that's quite interesting to keep in mind as well, that this is a very fast-moving industry where games become popular very quick, and then usually they don't retain users very long. So it's not like it will just continue to aggregate this user data.
Yeah, and we have some examples of more policy dimensions in the chat. For example, Rafael shared with us an update from Brazil, where América Móvil had a problem with Pokemon Go. It did not function for 2 days, and millions of consumers were mad. We notified América Móvil for a violation of Marco Civil, net neutrality rules. They denied doing traffic shaping and declared that Niantic caused a problem. Well, these kind of interactions between users, politics, and the private sector, the game developers, I think it's a very interesting dynamic. And as you said, Daniel, it's Pokemon Go will not be the last augmented reality hype. It's merely, it provides us a window through which we can suddenly see a whole new world of augmented reality applications and their influence, and yeah, it's very interesting to see where it will go. And Daniel, you might have a lot more idea about where it will go than we do, but it's very interesting, and also to see how the politics will shape around it, whether it will have an effect, a direct effect on policymaking, or whether policymakers will merely observe it and without any idea about what really to do about it, because they cannot predict what is going to happen either. So I think these are very interesting dynamics, and maybe you both want to say something to conclude this webinar.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think like I hope that they won't enforce very strict policies just because of a lack of understanding and fear of implications, because as you said very rightly so, this is something that's very much in development, and I think technological advancement can be so instrumental for fixing a lot of problems in society. It can also create problems, of course, but I think when you start to enforce policies on technology that is changing so fast, you basically limit the ability for it to evolve further. And because these things are evolving continuously, I think it's very important that the innovation can continue. Of course, with the caveat that personal user data should be protected as well as possible. But I think, as I said before, that's kind of in everyone's interest, except for people who have bad intentions. But people who have bad intentions will sort of always have bad intentions, right? So there should always be policies protecting people from people who have bad intentions, in my opinion. But I'm not sure if you guys agree.
Sure. My few comments is that we are entering now in the new phase. Let's say 15 years ago, everybody was talking about the end of geography, that internet is different, that we cannot have any policy, that simply we should give up on it. And then the things started changing, and we realized that internet affects the real life and the real policy. And then we have now with the let's say geographical location systems, we are anchored into geography more than ever before. Now we are entering the new phase. Therefore, the phase that the geography is dead was closed, let's say, 5 to 6 years ago. Now geography returned big time back to our consideration. Now we have different geographies. Geography which is interplay between virtual and physical. And there are really many questions, and I would say very few answers. And what is my concern is that some of these answers cannot be found on pure policy level. They require deeper thinking, and then I think academia and philosophers have to put more of their creativity in helping society and policymakers and technological companies to grasp this new complexity. And that's probably going to be the major challenge. I'm not seeing that process moving on. We are still dig deep into our small niches, whether it is for in our field ICANN or privacy or whatever. But there are bigger and more important things which are on horizon, and that would be important to gather people in order to answer these questions. And I think Barbara, congratulations for this initiative. This webinar is one of the first steps, and taxonomy as well. And I can assure you that at Diplo we will be putting a lot of efforts to find some sort of, to facilitate discussion and to try to search for some useful advices to society, companies, and policymakers.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think that it's really important not to go down the road of sort of following populist fear when kind of thinking and creating these policies. So exactly like Johan said, I think there needs to be a deep technological and kind of social understanding of what this technology actually does and what it actually means. And I think governments are sort of lacking that understanding at the moment. Not because it's their fault, but just because they don't really attract people that have that understanding. And there are some exceptions, of course, probably, but I think that's key. I think if governments want to create very useful policies that benefit everybody, they need to have people on board that really understand this technology and what goes on.
Thank you both for these insights. I think we can now close the webinar. Thank you so much for two very different perspectives on the same phenomenon. And in the end, I think there are a lot of things we can agree on. This webinar will be made available on our website. And Daniel, if you could share your PowerPoint with maybe some edits, it would be great. And thank you all for your very interesting questions, all the participants. It's been a really interesting webinar, and I wish you all a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, everybody, for the questions. And thank you, Barbara and Johan. Bye.